My name's Needham, and I'd like to tell you about the first 21 years of my life towed through the medium of pubs that don't exist anymore. I was born on my mum and dad's bed in Carlton Hill in Nottingham in May of 1968. Obviously, my mum was there with me. My dad was in a pub. He can't remember which one, but there were loads of them in Nottingham, so it could have been any of them. Could have been all of them, really. When I was 3 or so, we moved to Plimsoll Street in Ison Green, across the road from the Shipston's Brewery. Just as people in Nottingham chose between Forest and County when I was growing up, you found out very early that your dads were either Shippos men or O'Mails men. My dad was firmly Shippos at the time. Now, the pub at the top of our street where he'd be after work, especially in the first week of October when me and my sister would hang out the window in agony waiting for him to take us to Goose Fair, was called the Old General. And it was the first pub I got any memory of whatsoever, even though I never went in. The great thing about the Old General was he actually had a dummy of the bloke himself above the pub in a glass case. And every Christmas, they'd put a Santa suit and a beard on him. And that's when Ison Green knew that it was officially Christmas. I always thought that he was some kind of war hero from some Civil War or something like that. But it turned out that he was actually a local mentalist called Ben Watt, who used to get kids to chuck mud at school windows and then demand tuppence from the headmaster to make them stop. My dad's side of the family, they lived on Arkwright Street in the Meadows. And every Sunday, while I had dinner with me nonna and read comics, him and my grandpa would have a few of the Queens and the Crown. I always used to imagine what went on in there. Obviously, it was something so important that the male half of my family had to go there as soon as possible. With their help, I started to collect beer mats, and I built up a huge collection. But one day, when I took them to school to show the class, the bag split in the rain, and everyone started chucking them about the playground. I've never really got over that. The one pub I really wanted to go to in the Meadows, though, was the Beer Keller. Partly because the front of it looked like a beer barrel, but mainly because it was where Forest players and Radio Trent DJs used to go. My ambition was to become famous enough to be able to get in and have a pint in a massive wooden barrel with Robbo and Dale Winton whilst listening to Unpop music. When I was 6, we moved out to Top Valley, a brand new estate that was built on old farmland. We were the first people to move into our street, but there was already a pub there, the Charles II, otherwise known as the Charlie II or the Charlie. It was the first on the estate and the de facto community centre of the area. While the kids got to know each other at Westglade Junior School or Top Valley Comprehensive, the parents got to know each other at the Charlie. Then other pubs opened. There was the Royal Hunt, which was built next to a tree where highwaymen were rumoured to have been hanged. There was the Harvesters, which was supposed to have been dead rough. Kids from that end of Top Valley used to swap stories in the playground about their dads watching people throwing each other through windows. There was the Golden Ball as well. That was the pub that my dad took me and my sister to during the summer holidays, where he'd kind of like go in and lock us in the car outside with a radio and junior mastermind to keep us company. And then he'd turn up once an hour with a packet of crisps and a bottle of Apollo Cola with a straw in it. By this time, I'd kind of worked out what pubs were. You know, they were the gateway to adulthood, really, weren't they? Because they were the place where your dad went after work and your mum went on the weekend as a treat, and kids never went. You know, the kids were totally barred out from them. I mean, the only time you were allowed in a pub as a kid was at Skegness, where pubs had children's rooms. But, you know, it was obvious by the look on my dad's face that it wasn't really a proper pub and he didn't want to be there. You know, he'd shove his pint glass towards my mouth, which, you know, when you're that young is about the size of a kitchen sink. And then he'd say, yeah, oh, while landlord's not looking. And then he'd tip it all up your nose and down your best shirt, and my mum would go batchy at him. I mean, the only other time we'd be allowed in a pub in Nottingham was at a wedding do, but then again, we were too busy either standing on older people's feet as we danced with them or skidding across the floor to notice or care. I mean, the older I got, the more desperate I was to get into pubs because it seemed that everything to do with the world of adult males was tied into the pub. And there seem to be thousands of them in Nottingham, and they all seem to have their own little history going on. There was the Three Tons in Bestwood, which had a massive metal barrel hanging outside the front. And my dad once told me that it fell on a man's head and squashed him 2 foot tall. There were pubs in town like the Old Corner Pin on Clumber Street, which was the only pub in town that had a room specifically for women, but they only served the Marvs. And there were pubs with beautiful, elegant fronts like the Crown Inn just up the road. And there were pubs that were so enormous that you couldn't believe there were enough people in Nottingham to fill them, like the Flying Horse. And there were even pubs like the New Vic, which was a pub in the Vicky Centre for stressed out dads who couldn't cope with the shopping. There were pubs everywhere, and you just weren't allowed into them. And by the time I got to secondary school, that's when you start hearing rumours about lads a few years above you who Rory getting served in pubs, in places like Potter's or the Goose Fair or even the Deerstalker in Bestwood. I used to pray to have a bumfluff tash and a growth spurt so I could get in. But until then, me and my mates used to have to drink cans of Top Dake, Shandy and pretend to be K-Lide on the banks outside school, or nicking a can of your dad's Long Life out the fridge, drinking it in the bath because it was the only room in the house that had a lock on it. And then, you'd tip 90% of that down the toilet because you didn't like the taste. And then you'd pray that he won't kill you when he found out. I mean, it was weird because when I was in Germany, when I was 14, on a school exchange trip, they actually let 14-year-olds in the pub. And it was just different. You'd let a 14-year-old in a pub, but you weren't allowed to go into amusement arcade until you were 18, which I thought was mental. But it was nice, being sat there, being treated like a grown-up with a little glass of beer, but, even though the teachers were watching you. You'd seem like you kind of like, you were so near but so far. It didn't seem right. Anyway, back in Nottingham, when I was 15, I joined the local American football club's youth team. And we used to go and meet and train outside a pub called the Cremorne in the Meadows, And that's when pubs started becoming a more of a social place where clubs would meet. But, because we were a youth team, we'd have to meet in the car park. So we couldn't get in there. But then finally, when I was 16, on my 16th birthday, my dad took me out to the Charlie. And he got me absolutely K-Lide. And when we got back, he told me about the time when he worked in an abattoir, and I became a vegetarian on the spot, and I've never forgotten that night. And then every Saturday, me and 4 of my mates would finally pile into a Mini, and we'd go right across town to the Meadows again, to a place called Ziggy's, which was near the train station. It was the first pub that we actually went to try and pull girls. And we actually didn't find out it was a gay pub until about the 6th week we went. No, I'm not telling you how we found out. After I left college, where me and my mate spent way too many dinner hours in a pub called Jallan's because there were these new things called trivia machines and we could win the £10 jackpot more often than not, I started my first proper job, which was in a casino on Bridlesmith Gate. I absolutely hated the place, and the only thing I liked about it was the fact that I could go to Peggers after clocking off at 5 a.m. in the morning. It was the only pub in town that was open that time and serving booze because it was next to the market. And I used to love that. You'd sit there, 5 o'clock in the morning, finishing work, watching the sun come up with one eye, watching your workmate playing Golden Axe with the other, thinking you got one up on the entire world. And then at the age of 21, I left Nottingham for London University. And that's where the story ends. So that's 21 years, and it's 21 pubs that already had some beer in on my life, and only one still exists today as a place that serves alcohol. All the rest of them are gone. I mean, the Charlie, where I used to go with my first girlfriend to watch some of the turns on a Monday night, and laugh at the sight of my dad getting a marred on when the bingo started, because he hated bingo, and where everyone from school used to come from all over the country to link up on Christmas Day, and it was the only time you ever saw them that year. Well, that pub was run into the ground by brewery after brewery, eventually sold off. It's now a mini market, or whatever you want to call it. The Royal Hunt, where I had my 21st birthday do, where all my family turned up, and it was probably one of the best nights of my life. I can remember being in this brand new C&A suit, laughing at me aunties, dancing to Rebel Without a Pause by Public Enemy, and noticing the signs on the wall because the local and country and western club used to go there, and they used to have signs that read no firing guns unless instructed to by the DJ. Well, that place became really moody and dangerous for reasons I won't go into, and that was flattened to become a car park for the new massive Tesco. I mean, I could go on and on and on about all these pubs and what's happened to them, but the thing is that pubs like the Charlie and the Hunt, they weren't supposed to be shut down after a few decades. They were supposed to be the sites of our wedding dues. We were supposed to have our retirement parties there. We were supposed to have our wakes there, with generation after generation using them as the community centres that they actually were. I mean, there's a load of ramble spoke about Nottingham being a binge drink city. And it's not true at all. We drink just as much as everywhere else, but we're just a bit more honest than other places, I think. But Nottingham is a booze town, you can't deny that. And it's a booze town in the best sense of the word. The place was built on sandstone, so our ancestors created a cave system, which actually made us the only place in the country for quite a while that could brew beer all year round. There's 3 pubs in the city centre that have a claim to being the oldest pub in England, which probably means the world. We've got a tourist industry and even universities that play on the fact in their literature that, you come to Nottingham, there's loads of pubs, you'll have a good time. We do have the densest concentration of pubs in the city centre, so I've been told. But city centre pubs and locals are 2 completely different things. And, our generation is witnessing the death of the local. I mean, there used to be 7 pubs within walking distance from my mum and dad's house in Top Valley. And now there's only 1. And while we're being told that we're drinking more, with the death of the local, we're actually socialising less. And there's something wrong with that. Anyway, enough of my ramble. Thank you for listening, and cheers.